topic tonight is hydration science for endurance athletes, and we have Vishal Patel, who is the director of product development at Nuun Hydration, joining us. My name is Courtney Jacobson. I'm one of the founders of GritLink. GritLink helps the endurance and adventure community connect with healthcare providers who are specialists in working with athletes. So, our topic tonight, hydration. I think that a lot of endurance athletes, at least the athletes I've talked to, struggle quite a bit with losing energy at some point on a long workout. And sometimes it's hard to tell if that is related to hydration or electrolytes, or do we need calories? There's also a lot of confusion because there's so many different sports drinks out there, and it's hard to know how we can troubleshoot some of these issues that we have. So our goals tonight are to educate you, the endurance athlete, about the purpose of hydration for long distance sports, and also to explain the function of electrolytes during endurance activities. So as I mentioned, we have an expert here tonight, Vishal Patel, the Director of Product Development at Nuun. Vishal, Nuun, for those of you who are not familiar, Nuun is a company who specializes in hydration products, and they have a mission to empower more movement. Vishal himself is a runner and an endurance athlete, and he has a background in nutritional sciences and chemistry, and has been developing products for Nuun for the past 7 years. And when he's not running, you can find him pampering his beautiful golden retriever, Ivy.
Yeah, thanks for getting the last piece in.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here tonight, Vishal. And I think we're going to have a great discussion, and I know there's a lot of questions out there. So if you don't mind, I think we should just jump right into maybe setting the stage here. And if you can kind of tell us, what are the fundamental goals of hydration? And touch a little bit on like, why is it that just water alone is not enough, and what's the purpose of electrolytes, and why do we need them?
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good start there. And you were mentioning, Courtney, earlier when you were starting. One of the things that we wanted to kind of solve is some questions that athletes have, and one of them is, that they're fatigued or like they're tired or something during exercise. And a lot of people point that directly towards like carbohydrates or fueling or caffeine, stuff that will inherently give you energy. But one thing that I always try to remind all athletes, especially endurance athletes, is that the fundamental goals of hydration, when it's done right, when you have the right kind of ratios of water to electrolytes to carbohydrates, helps kind of move fluid and electrolytes into absorption. So it helps increase blood circulation. It allows oxygen to get to your working muscles, which in turn will just allow them to perform better and give you more energy. A lot of times when athletes get kind of a dead legs or something like that, or they're bonking during exercise, we also like to look at their hydration, not just during the exercise or during the activity, but leading up to it, to see what their water and electrolyte levels are, to see where they stand, because we know that when it is done properly, it can kind of really serve a larger function than cramping or just replenishing what you would lose in sweat, which are also really key aspects of kind of staying hydrated during exercise. And when we talk about kind of the concentration and when I mentioned when it's done properly, it kind of leads you to the base. Like, water, yes, water is going to hydrate you. It's going to provide fluids that you need. But when you're exercising, your body needs more. Like, it needs a little bit of help pushing that water into circulation. So, when you eat or drink anything, the first step is, it's going to go through your mouth, esophagus, it's going to land in your stomach, where depending on that concentration, it's either going to sit there for a little while or it's going to start kind of getting into absorption. And plain water, it doesn't have the nutrients like electrolytes, like sodium, potassium, and chloride that help kind of push it into circulation and help with the absorption. So when you're exercising and your body's just inherently under stress, just from the movement aspect of it, with increased heart rate, breathing more, your body needs a little bit of help to kind of get things going. And when you have the right balance of electrolytes to carbs to fluid, it'll work more in your favor in kind of delivering all of those nutrients.
Can you tell us a little bit more about electrolytes? So you mentioned sodium, potassium, and chloride, but maybe like give us a little primer. We see these words on, ingredients lists for sports drinks, but there's different kinds of sodium. There's sodium bicarbonate, and tell us a little bit more about electrolytes and what's the function
Yeah.
of them.
Right. So, at the surface level, kind of electrolytes are essentially just electronically charged particles that are really component and really crucial for a lot of just normal bodily functions. Your blood has a high concentration. It has to have the right concentration of sodium to potassium to chloride to really just live and to function properly. And those are three of probably the most important electrolytes out there. Magnesium and calcium also are key electrolytes that serve more functional aspects in kind of muscle health and bone health as well. That you want to kind of supply those key aspects of your body with those electrolytes. But so the sodium, potassium, magnesium, calcium, and chloride are kind of those five key ones. Very generally, they're going to help you hydrate better. They're going to help you pull water into circulation. They're going to help with absorption, so your body can actually, not just pee anything out and actually can utilize it. So that is kind of the more general function. Now, there are a lot of types. Technically, table salt, sea salt, is an electrolyte because it has sodium and chloride, which are two very important electrolytes. But what you really want to look for when you're kind of looking at sport drinks or beverages to drink, when you're dehydrated, is the sodium citrates, like the actual form of the electrolytes. You want it to be citrates, and that sodium, potassium, magnesium citrate, those are actually the electrolytes that you readily find in an IV solution when you're at the hospital and you're at a medical induced dehydration, or where it's more medical related, not necessarily to exercise. So we do believe that those are some of the most bioavailable. What that means is, like, your body can absorb a high percentage of them and they get into circulation immediately. Now, oftentimes, like in Nuun, for example, the effervescence kind of does that for you. So when you combine sodium bicarbonate to citric acid in that fizzy and the bubbles that you see that dissolve the tablet, it's actually converting all of those nutrients into the citrate, so you can absorb them faster and more readily. So that's something that you definitely want to keep in mind. Whenever you have too much of one electrolyte over the other, that's always kind of a red flag, and you want to kind of understand why it's at those specific levels. Generally, we tend to have more sodium than potassium during exercise. Your body's going to utilize sodium more. It's lost more during sweat and while you're breathing, and plays a more crucial role in the fluid absorption. When you see products or drinks like coconut water or something like that that really just has a high amount of potassium and that's it, it can actually cause an imbalance, and can kind of degrade performance. So it's really important to make sure that it has all five of those electrolytes at a ratio that's balanced and that's going to work with your body. And if you're seeing something that has, 4 or 5 times as much as potassium to sodium, or really vice versa, it's almost like you just need to kind of seek to understand what the function of that product is, and to make sure that it will benefit, or it will serve the purpose of hydration during endurance activities.
Hmm. I'm curious to know, you're talking a lot about the balance of electrolytes, and there's all these different kinds of electrolytes, and
Hmm.
obviously everybody's body chemistry is different. And so I'm actually going to ask everybody who's on the call right now, if you could just type into the chat. I'm curious, when you all as athletes think of dehydration or you think of electrolyte imbalance, what are some of the things that come to mind? What's like the first thing that comes to mind? A little word association. If we could just kind of get some words here. Bonking. Oh, 2 bonking. Okay.
Yeah, that's interesting, because we kind of touched on that a little bit in the beginning, as like, and that's great. In terms of like, when you are dehydrated, you know, there's a lot of systems that are slowly shutting down. Your muscular system, as well as a lot of your cognitive function. So that's it's either going to send signals to your body that it's really tired, or it's going to kind of stop those key bodily parts that are eating up those electrolytes, like your muscles, and kind of slow them down, which can lead to kind of muscle twitching, or cramping, or something like that as well. So it's interesting to kind of look at it, because you don't really think that electrolytes and hydration can be the cause of just kind of bonking, or fatigue during exercise. But that's why we always kind of harp to, it's not always about during exercise, it's about before and after, and the days leading up. You always want to kind of keep an eye on your hydration status. The easiest way to tell is just by monitoring your urine color as well. And that'll be a really good indication. You want to kind of stick to a more pale yellow color, and then just listen to your body as well. Like, if you have a headache that just randomly popped up while you're working out, it's probably because you're dehydrated. I mean, there's a lot of other factors that can come into play, but it's like, if you're getting the chills, if you're getting goosebumps, if you can't kind of maintain a steady effort when it should feel steady, then you really need to kind of take a step back, let your body kind of catch up a little bit, and focus in on that hydration aspect.
Yeah, we had a couple people mention cramping. Um, and I've heard a lot of athletes talk a lot about cramping. And the first thing that they say is, they took salt tabs, and then they took another salt tab, and then they took another salt tab. Um, so there might be a little bit of myth debunking going on here, but can you talk about what is cramping? Like, what's actually happening in our bodies when we cramp, and how does hydration and electrolytes play a role in helping us relieve cramping?
Right. Yeah, that's a good question. And a cramping kind of science, I think, is continuing to evolve as well. Like, I do think we're learning more and more, as studies are coming out, and hearing testimonials on what's the true cause of it. What's essentially happening to your body is, there's some sort of disruption in signals from your brain to your muscle fibers that are kind of seizing them up. So, and that's what, is almost bringing you to a halt. So, the things that we know that have kind of made sure those channels are communicating properly is hydration, because a lot of those communications channels are sodium, potassium, especially potassium and chloride dependent, which are key electrolytes that you would find in there. So, I've heard yeah, a lot of people that, oh, like if they get a cramp, they have to take, they have to take a salt tablet, or they have to, eat a bunch of bananas or something like that. So, when you're cramping, there's not necessarily an electrolyte deficiency. There is a buildup of lactic acid that is happening, which is the result of kind of fatigue, miscommunicating, cell disruptions and things like that. And for some people, a lot of it could be psychological, but the problem with kind of just taking a salt tablet is you're probably only going to drink 4 ounces of fluid with that, which isn't going to do much. Like the fluid aspect of it is, like we talked about, almost like a delivery mechanism, to kind of help with to help with the delivery, and to get oxygen flowing back again. So hydration can relieve some of that. But personally, what I found, and what I've kind of consulted with, and given the advice to a lot of athletes, is I did kind of learn a little bit of a trick from an old chiropractor who was a team doctor for USA Swimming, and he mentioned, and I had worked for Nuun, and he mentioned that a lot of the swimmers, right before they would get into pool, would pop Tums, and Tums has calcium carbonate in there, which is a buffer, and it helps buffer lactic acid. And he's like, oh, I noticed the Nuun tablets have calcium carbonate, so can it help in that? And I said no, because the carbonate will convert into citrate in our product when it's combined with fluid, but that is something that can work. So one thing I actually do recommend to athletes, especially endurance athletes, if you're going on a long run or a bike, or if you're a trail runner and you can carry, is to just pack a few of just the regular strength Tums. Just the mint flavor. The other ones have a bunch of artificial stuff in it, like colors and stuff like that. And just taking half of something like that when you feel a cramp coming on will kind of help buffer a lot of that lactic acid that's building up, and can kind of alleviate a lot of that. I mean, honestly, I've raced ultras where I've taken a spill, and my like calf just started cramping up, and I popped the Tums and I was fine. And I've heard it from many people that it works. So from the cramping side of it, stay obviously on top of hydration. But if you are kind of like in a pinch, it's not that hard to just carry a few of those tablets with you, a few Tums with you, and then just take it, and kind of decrease the intensity of it, of what you're doing. That'll kind of help as well.
So where do you think that myth comes from, that the salt tabs are going to help with the cramping, or do the salt tabs work for some people?
I mean, they might. I think the salt tab piece of it, I think there has been, um, like a connection between just electrolyte deficiency, and cramping. So people think that, when they cramp, they're not getting enough water and electrolytes to those muscles, which is true, which is absolutely true. But, a salt tab will only have sodium and chloride in it too. And those tend to not be the right, you want sodium citrate, or potassium chloride, which is kind of a better source of chloride, as you get a potassium molecule in there as well. So oftentimes a lot of salt tabs just don't have the right form of electrolytes, and you're not consuming it with adequate fluid, to kind of help with that hydration, and to help with that side of it. And one other thing to mention is that it's not also just about water and electrolytes. You do need carbohydrates in there. So a little bit of sugar, in the form of dextrose, and or cane sugar, will help kind of activate some transport mechanisms, so you can alleviate a lot of the stress of having fluid buildup in your stomach, or really just not get to where it needs to go.
Hmm. There was a question in the chat from Barry about V8, and you had also mentioned coconut water.
Hmm.
Um, I had a bunch of athletes had asked a question about just using real food or natural type of ingredients for effective hydration. And so, yeah, here's another one. Pickle juice is also in the chat now. So V8, pickle juice, coconut water. Um, do you recommend what are the best natural or real foods that help with hydration and I guess the electrolyte balance we need?
Right. Yeah. So, I really don't recommend anybody to drink coconut water. Like I truly don't. Like there are case studies of athletes dying from drinking it, because of the just the a drink with such high amounts of potassium and not enough sodium will just throw the electrolyte imbalance in your blood completely off. And when your body is extremely dehydrated, it needs sodium and chloride more than potassium. So that you're not, so that imbalance can actually cause a lot of issue. Not to kind of get dramatic. You can obviously drink coconut water if you want, like just during the day or when you're sitting at your desk. That's fine. But I wouldn't use it as a solution when you're, exercise based dehydrated, or you're dehydrated in result of exercise or some sort of medical issue, because you do want a proper balance between sodium, potassium, chloride. So that is important. I mean, if you want to just drink coconut water, I would just recommend adding like a half a teaspoon of sea salt in it, just so you can try to kind of get that balance back right. But I would recommend sticking to more products that are natural, that aren't necessarily, aren't necessarily, grown, in your garden, if you would, or something like that. But they are sourced naturally, and they do have the right ratios of sodium and potassium to kind of truly have that functional ability to hydrate you when you're dehydrated. The V8 and the pickle juice things. There's some research out there that there's some sort of molecule in pickles that kind of change that cell signal disruption that we talked about with cramping. So it's kind of the same thing. There is another product, I forgot the name of it, or I'm not even sure if it's still around, that was like a little shot, and it was like really spicy. And really all it was is they knew that certain types of peppers or certain types of foods had a different had some sort of molecule in it that corrected that cell disruption. So you know which helps alleviate cramps, like when you're really when they really set in. So like I kind of mentioned earlier, like the science is kind of continuing to evolve. What we do know for sure is that cramps happen when there is like an overexertion. So you're running too hard when you probably shouldn't, or you're cycling too hard. If you've been running flats for an hour, and then you suddenly start that muscle fiber change, or when you're using different muscles that aren't necessarily were used, there's that sort of disruption in that signaling that can kind of pull up and have lactic acid build up, which can kind of slow things down. You know, a decrease in just overall blood flow, which was just within the body, is also known to kind of impair muscle function, which can kind of lead to exercise. Which can lead to cramping. So one way that we know that research has showed us is that when you are properly hydrated and blood is circulating properly, it can kind of help mitigate a lot of that as well. Personally, for me, uh, I think cramps primarily come along when there's an overexertion. when you are either racing when it's way too hot and you still haven't decreased your intensity, but you've only increased more fluid. Like that's not going to do it. Like you're going to have to really judge your intensity and make sure that your body can handle a lot of that. At least in most of in my I guess racing career, the only times I've gotten cramps is honestly, and maybe it is because I work for Nuun and I've been studying hydration for the last 10 years. But the only time I've gotten it honestly is when I knew I was running way faster than I should, or if I was just going uphill for an extended period of time and I decided to run faster than I was for the last 15, 20 minutes. But I also know that I generally try to stay pretty well hydrated throughout the day, and I do kind of listen to those tall tale signs prior in focusing in on that, which I do think can help. But I've never tried pickle juice or anything like that. I don't think my body would respond well to that, like something that's spicy or acidic like during exercise. So but the Tums route in just I do think there's something there in kind of helping buffer lactic acid buildup, and I think it's more could be more at the blood level than we think, and that actually points back to a lot of the early cramping research and science really that came out like in the early 80s. So and now it's like it's kind of evolving, and we're trying to figure out what's going to work best for each individual as well.
Mm. There's a good question in the chat. Can you electrolyte load the way that you carb load?
Yeah, you can. So we do recommend kind of loading up on electrolytes the night before and the especially the morning of. In terms of like taking higher concentrations, like for example with Nuun, I actually tell people to drink 2 or 3 tablets the night before and the morning of in the same amount of water just to get that electrolyte concentration up. And what that will do is that actually helps what's called expand plasma volume. So plasma volume is essentially means that you want to expand your cells. The more you can expand the volume of your cells, the more water and electrolytes they can hold. So your body can store it and utilize it more effectively. Now, there is when you're exercising, and naturally there is a reduction in plasma volume. Your cells are going to start to shrink a little bit as it's starting to eat up more nutrients. So if you can expand those and kind of have little pockets of is kind of how I like to explain it, of electrolytes and fluids ready in your body primed, they can kind of alleviate a lot of that beforehand. So there is a way you can do it, and I do recommend it. And in fact, not to tease it out too much, but we are launching a product next week that is kind of focusing in on that aspect and utilizing a lot of newer hydration science on the correct way to hyperhydrate and prime your body before kind of endurance exercise. And it has a lot to do with plasma volume expansion, getting more electrolytes into your system. So, when your body's going to naturally need them, they're there, ready to go, and you have some reserves as well.
Mm. I will come back to some of these other questions in the chat, but I wanted to get to sweat rates. So we have some heavy sweaters and light sweaters. And also everybody has a different amount of salt in their sweat. So if somebody knows that they're a heavy sweater or an extra salty sweater, do they need to be doubling up on electrolytes?
So that's a good question. No, you don't. So you don't need to double up on electrolytes during exercise. So that's one kind of clarification. I There isn't, to the best of my knowledge, and to a lot of scientists' knowledge, there isn't any scientific data that actually suggests your composition of your sweat in terms of how salty or how much potassium it has in it actually impacts hydration. There's none. Some people just think that, hey, I when I'm sweating, I see salt on my skin, and that means I'm a salty sweater or I'm a heavy sweater. That actually just means your dietary intake of sodium chloride it is probably a little bit more than it should be. So that doesn't necessarily mean that your body is somehow making more salt and just kind of letting it out. It might indicate that your intake of dietary sodium chloride, like table salt, which is in various different other foods, is probably too high. Now, some scientists may have differences of opinion in that's what I believe, and that's what the data indicates, and that's what I've kind of seen in myself as well. Is that, if I know I ate a little bit, if I snacked too much or something, and then I went for a run and it was hot, I know I'll see salt on it. But what one thing is to so there's kind of two aspects of your question, or maybe I turned it into two aspects. There's the sweat rate about part of it, which is how much you're sweating, and then there's a sweat composition side of it as well. The sweat rate is obviously very, very important, and it's very different from anyone, male, female, age, different body types, different training environments. When you're at altitude, sea level, humidity, all of that stuff is going to impact your sweat rate. And one thing that I always recommend that athletes do is to kind of monitor your sweat rate, as you're transitioning into different training blocks. Because your sweat rate is going to change as you get fit. And oftentimes when you're starting your training block in the winter, you're going to end it maybe in the spring, and it's going to be warmer. So at the tail end of that, your sweat rate is inherently also going to change. So, just something as simple as going for an easy hour run or a ride and just weighing yourself nude before and after will allow you, and then the differences in your weight, you just divide it in half to figure out how much fluid you should be drinking. And Courtney, I can give you a basic calculation that you can post for everyone as well. So that's going to fluctuate over time. So generally we know that most people will be fine between consuming about 16 to 20 ounces of fluid an hour. Like that does tend to match up generally at sweat rates for a lot of different sports. But I always tell people to kind of know what your body can handle, and not 16 ounces is always a good starting point. The key aspect about hydrating in terms of sweat rate is like, your body's going to lose water via your sweat consistently. So you also want to you want to hydrate consistently as well. So not just every 30 minutes try to drink 6 or 8 ounces of fluid, but really every 6 to 7 minutes try to take a few sips to try to not necessarily match what you're losing, but you want to kind of give your body those key nutrients as well, just to make sure things are firing up correctly. In the sweat composition side of it, like I kind of mentioned, I personally, I'm not convinced that people can make more salt in their body. It is something that is external that's causing you to lose a high amount of salt. Now, another aspect of it is, like, sometimes you can drink a product that has a lot of sodium or a lot of electrolytes in there, and maybe not enough carbohydrates in there. So your body isn't going to actually absorb that fluid effectively. So that can also be a result of it. That's another aspect. But if you do notice that you have a higher sweat rate for whatever reason, based on your training intensity or just in the summer, and especially when we're transitioning seasons too, as your body is just under a lot of shock. Even if there's a 10-degree fluctuation, it's a pretty big, it can have a pretty big impact on your core temperature. And what we know about core temperature is even if it shifts like 0.2 or 0.3 degrees, like that's going to make a pretty big impact on just how all the systems are working together. But in those scenarios where that you may be a heavier sweater or things like that, it's kind of important to make sure the night before, in 1 to 2 hours before exercise, you're kind of giving your body a higher dosage of electrolytes and a higher dosage of fluids to try to combat that as much as you can.
Mm. Wow, you said a lot there. I have a lot of comments and questions regarding the sweat rate. You touched very briefly on different sweat rates for different sports, and I do triathlon. I see there's a lot of triathletes in the audience here, and I've noticed that I sweat more when I run as opposed to bike, but it's harder for me to take in liquid when I'm running,
right.
As opposed to biking. So this sweat rate calculator that you're going to provide, is it kind of universal for all sports? Like we just have to know what our sweat rates are at different sports?
Sort of. I mean, like this will allow you to kind of get a good baseline. Like when I work with triathletes, I always tell them to drink more on the bike, just because I know they're not going to drink enough on the run. So like you want to try to combat that as much as you can. So to try to prepare your body, because when you're running, you're more than likely your heart rate is going to be higher. Your body, you're using more muscle groups than just kind of your legs, if you would. Like I know when you're cycling, it's more than that, but there's more of a dynamic movement to running, which is just gonna require fluid and electrolytes to go everywhere instead of just kind of focusing in on those key muscle groups. That is one aspect of it that you want to kind of be aware of. And then when you're running too, you tend to lose more water in just respiration as well. So a lot of people don't notice that when you're when we're talking, you're losing water, and as your heart rate increases, your breathing rate is also increasing, which is also going to allow you to lose more water. So that's another aspect why people, why you are definitely going to lose more during the run. And that's why I think triathletes are actually lucky, because they can prepare themselves for that. You're on the bike for several hours in some cases, where you can have a consistent fluid intake with very little excuses, in terms of like it's right there. And there's all sorts of gadgets and stuff that can make it easier or more effective. So I always think look at it that way, that when we do calculations for athletes and things like that, we tend to add about 4 ounces extra on the bike than you would on the run. So when you're doing that, just to note that it's not because you're sweating more on the bike, but it's really to try to know that you're probably not going to be able to either have access to as consistent fluid, or it's just going to be a little bit harder to get the right drink that you want. And then again, with cyclists too, I'm like, you have a water bottle too that you can have your own drink mix. So you don't have to. And I know runners can carry stuff too, but I also know, like, I don't like to do it. I'm lucky. I try to only race now, or I try to only do races that where I know Noon's on course, so I don't have to carry anything, just because like I understand it's a hassle, but you know, if you want to kind of make sure you're helping your body and doing everything you can, you know, it's always important for that more consistent intake, where on the bike that's a little bit more feasible to do.
Mm. So, sort of a similar question to different sports. How about working at different efforts? So, what are the
Right. Yep.
hydration needs for, say, like a very easy 2 hour training run versus a half marathon at a race pace?
Right. Yeah. So that's a good question too. I mean, the one thing I kind of tell people is that the yes, your sweat rate is going to be different at those different intensity levels. Um, um, but how much your body needs in terms of fluids to kind of maintain performance, getting your muscles firing out, you know, getting oxygen to where it needs to go, and improving the absorption of everything isn't going to change much from when you're out for an easy ride that's like two hours, or like an hour and a half harder run. So I do still recommend keeping the same dosage, if you would, of fluid. I mean, if you're only running out there for less than an hour or less than 45 minutes, and you know it's super casual, like you don't need to take anything with you. You'll be just fine if you're unless like you're like I mentioned, like, listen to your body. Like, if you have a headache or something like that, or you randomly got chills or goosebumps throughout the day, or leading up to it, your body's kind of telling you that, hey, like, maybe you should take a rest day, or back off a little bit on it. So you know, we try to recommend, you know, the same hydration protocol regardless of the workout intensity. The duration is usually the key aspect of if you need it or not.
Okay, that's interesting. Um, I Are there any questions from the audience? There's a couple here that we can get to, but please start typing them in the chat. We've got 15 minutes left, and so I still have some questions to ask Vishal, but I want to make sure that all of you get your questions answered. Um, oh, here's one about Noon specifically. Why do Noon tablets expire?
Yeah, so that's a good question. So, I mean, we have to, although, you know, the minerals and the ingredients are natural, you know, there is some elements we can't control, like, you know, like moisture, air, and things like that that do get exposed to the tablets when you open them from a tube, or if they're sitting in things like that over time, like really after like 2 3 years. You know, we conservatively put expirations because, after that period, you know, when they could be exposed to moisture or oxygen or something like that, you know, the flavors will start to diminish. The electrolyte amount that's on that label claim, it won't necessarily be at 300 milligrams then, or whatever it is. Like, they tend to degrade over time. So we like to kind of add that in there, you know, from that after that expiration date, we can't necessarily guarantee it's going to taste as good as it should, like on day one, and it's going to have the full electrolyte. And that's with a lot of, like, you know, non-perishable products, whether they're, you know, your gels or things like that, which I guess have a lot more sugar and water in there, that their shelf lives are a little bit less. But it's like, you know, with vitamins and minerals, just over time, their amount is just going to degrade. And you know, it's hard to kind of get them to be stable for, you know, years and years and years, and that's why the fresh batches kind of help with that.
Okay. I'm going to go back to a question. How bad is 5 hour energy drink?
I mean, like it's not. I mean, it's like I don't know all the ingredients off the top of my head. I mean, if I were to guess, it's probably just extremely high in caffeine and like vitamin B12, which again, those are good and they're great for energy. But like what I always tell anyone, people that, when you're consuming too much of one thing, it's gonna trick your body in some way. Like, and it's gonna kind of like if you're just going to consume a really high amount of caffeine, then just do that. Like just drink coffee or something like that. When you combine like 300 milligrams of caffeine and like 50,000% of your daily value of B12, it's like your body doesn't know what to do with it. So that's why you're going to just pee it all out, or you're not going to use it, or it's going to cause some other issues and things like that. Now, like I'm sure 5 Hour Energy has evolved throughout the years, and they've cleaned up their product, and I'm sure they have addressed some of those consumer sides of it. But when you take in a high amount of caffeine and B12, it's going to give you a push, and it's going to give you a nice lift. Now, would I take that day in, day out? No. But like I understand that, really high dosages of stuff like that can help. But I also, believe that a well-balanced product or a well-balanced energy drink, if you would, it is the more effective route. And the other aspect about energy and in terms of exercise is that, we always look at it in terms of like really stimulant based, where like it's like really strong peripheral energy that is just gonna make me run really fast, or just get me jacked. We don't really talk about energy in the aspects of focus or cognitive energy, which is something that also is going to degrade during exercise. And if you can had ingredients and nutrients in energy drinks or pre workout products that have a focused cognitive aspect, it actually will enhance the stimulant component of it as well. So when you combine different adaptogens, if you would, or amino acids with caffeine, they can work more effectively at lower doses. So that's another teaser kind of what's to come from Nuun, as well as that we're approaching kind of the energy side of it a little bit differently in terms of, yes, we realize there are some nutrients or ingredients that do help with that, but we're also big proponents of balance in kind of helping your body naturally produce energy, and to help your body naturally kind of combat fatigue and things like that.
Hmm. Another question in the chat: what does foamy urine indicate?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, that it can be a couple things. Like, there's a protein aspect of that as well. So a lot of times, if you're not recovering properly and you don't have it, you're not consuming enough protein. You'll start essentially almost like losing certain nutrients that can make your urine seem cloudy. So one actually. If you do notice that, what I would do is not obviously just go eat a protein bar or drink something like that, but at any pharmacy or anywhere online, you can get urine analysis strips. They're just reagent strips, and it's actually a very, very effective measurement of how well you're recovering from exercise. It's going to measure your specific gravity, which is a good indication of hydration. It'll actually give you ketone and protein measurements as well, to see A, if you're losing protein, or B, if you're losing ketones, which are a couple of good indications of overall nutrition and recovery. So that is an aspect of it where we've seen stuff like that, and your urine can tell you a lot And buying those strips are very, economical, and it's just a quick way to figure out if like, hey, like I'm fatigued but I'm not training that, that much harder, or anything like that. Like what's going on. It could just be as simple as like a macronutrient, or something like protein, or something like that, that your body isn't getting enough of, for whatever reason. So I do tend to recommend, that sort of analysis. And I know deep in our blog archives, with some, well calculated Google searches, you can find a blog that I've written, about that, and how you can measure that, because it is a really good indication. You don't have to go to a lab. You can, and I'm not saying like I'm not encouraging kind of self-diagnosis, but I am saying like there are some tools out there that you can kind of figure out and utilize to kind of, try some things out, or to try to figure out what's going on with your body, rather than kind of going, doing a full-on audit of everything you're doing. It could be something kind of as simple as maybe hydration, or maybe I'm not getting, the right balance of nutrients.
A question from Rudy. Water and CO2 are also byproducts of metabolizing carbohydrates, and that
Mhm.
water surely doesn't need to be replaced. So one should expect to lose weight over the course of a run, even if hydrating adequately. Is that true?
Yes, like to some degree, yes. Like we actually, and that's why we don't actually go for 100% replenishment, right? So, if you're losing 2 pounds an hour, which, some people equate to about 16 ounces of fluid, like we don't say to replenish all of it, because, the cost of, like the question was, the cost of energy and just your body burning through carbohydrates and fat is going to require water, as is. The what we're trying to get with hydration is really a more of that delivery mechanism, is to get everything into circulation, to alleviate, a lot of, potential GI issues and things like that. So when you bring in fueling, whether it's gels or chews, or bars or something like that, there isn't like this pool of water in your stomach that's going to kind of mess things up. Like your stomach is you're ready, and your body is ready to kind of take in those other nutrients, like carbs, fats, whatever your fueling source is, that are going to, require, like the question, mentioned, water to break it down effectively. So there's like that storage component of it, and then there's that other consistent supply to just make sure that blood and oxygen is flowing properly.
Okay, we have another question from Jess. Are there any negative effects to drinking Nuun with electrolytes on your off training days?
No, I mean, especially for endurance athletes, or athletes, like like the one thing I love about Noon, and this is not because I work there, because, the base of the product is still the same from when I started. Like we've refined a lot of things, just applying newer hydration science, and listening to our consumers. But, I talk about it so versatile, because, it's just electrolytes and about a gram of sugar. Like you don't have to worry about, like, overloading on calories or anything like that. It's going to provide this consistent intake of electrolytes. I mean, so if you're working out and you're an endurance athlete, you can drink Noon Sport when you're at rest. If you're in kind of a lower training block, or you're just, for whatever reason, you're worried about, I don't want to drink too much sodium or things like that. Our vitamins line has a different electrolyte balance, a little bit less sodium, a little bit more potassium in there, because like that is going to be the more beneficial route when you're at rest, and you're not necessarily in motion, or you're kind of recovering, from it. But on rest days, we rest days are a good day to kind of, recover from nutrition and hydration as well. Like you're letting your body kind of rest, and the way to let your, hydration or your nutrition rest is just to give it those nutrients, and to give it fluid and electrolytes, so it can kind of help the rest of your body recover properly as well.
Okay, we have a question in the Q&A from David. He says, I just moved from Seattle to Charleston and am struggling with the humidity. How can I adjust my hydration plan to accommodate for the drastic change of climate?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So the one thing I would do for sure is if you have a morning, like definitely start maybe trying to run in the mornings where temperatures are lower. I know humidity is still going to be pretty high, but at the surface level, kind of hyperhydrating during those initial acclimation phases are going to really help. So I would even, if you're using a Nuun Sport or a product that has, a hydration based product, maybe just double it up the night before to the night before your run, to kind of to expand plasma volume, to kind of store electrolytes. Because what's happening obviously to your body there is, it's a drastic, like you mentioned, it's a drastic change in climate. Your core temperature is going to rise, your heart rate is going to increase. All of those factors are going to require your body to use up more water and electrolytes than it's normal. And a lot of times when you see that such a drastic change, your body is almost confused in terms of, like, I've been running in Seattle where like it's in the 50s, and then all of a sudden a week later you're running in 15-20 degrees higher and with more humidity. Your body is almost confused. So there's like that cognitive disruption and more some self-signaling disruptions. And hydration does kind of make sure a lot of things in your brain and at the cognitive level are functioning properly. So I would just say the night before, try to load up on it, and to try to decrease intensity and duration over the first couple weeks while your body is adjusting.
Well, thank you, first of all, Vishal, for all of the education that you've given us. It was so much information. I hope all of you got some good notes, and you can contact just for general inquiries at Nuun. I put the contact information up on the screen here. You can go to info@nuunlife.com. And any questions about GritLink, or if you're interested in joining GritLink, go to gritlink.net. We also have a Patreon community where you can contribute to GritLink for as little as $5 a month. And that's it. So thank you all so much for being here tonight. Thank you again, Vishal. If you all want to give some love to Vishal in the chat, thank him for coming.